Number 76, Mastering Modern Selling. We're all back. The technology is working. Life is good.
It is all good.
It is all good. Hey, I had a number of people ask me that if you guys threw me off the show because I haven't been around for the last 3 weeks. And
Did you tell him not yet?
I told him that I was in the middle of contract negotiations. And
it was a fierce standoff.
Yes,
You know,
yeah.
he was a holdout in training camp this year. It got nasty. But
Well, I'm unionized too, and that threw another layer into it.
Yeah, and you know, after Brandon's deal that he got earlier, I had to hold out. I mean, it's just, I don't know. Anyway, we're all settled out. It's all good. Everything's working again, and we have a great guest today, Dale Dupree. Welcome.
What's up, guys?
Dale's sitting there wondering what the heck he got himself into now with these clowns.
Yeah.
But we told him, to be fair, we told him in the green room, expect bad jokes and just corny witticisms.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if this is how it starts, I'm excited to see where it goes. You know?
Beautiful. He hasn't left us yet.
That's right. Well,
if he takes any technical difficulties, we'll know why.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, Dale's going to be going, and then he's just going to disappear and run and hide. But hey, welcome everybody on the podcast too. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you love what we talk about, we'd really appreciate a review. Man, snap a picture of on your phone, send it with somebody that could listen and enjoy us as well. And then to the live LinkedIn and YouTube and wherever else we are, Facebook, X, whatever. Appreciate you being here. And as always, we'd love to know who you are. Join the conversation, please. Throw in your comments, ask questions, tell us we're crazy, tell us we're right, whatever. I think we're going to have some fun today. So, Tom, let's get going. Off to you.
Yeah. So Dale, welcome again. Why don't we start off? Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, why you're the rebel leader, and we have some good topics today.
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about myself. Everybody's favorite thing to do, right? So
we
name's
do
Dale
that
Dupree.
a lot here, so you're right at home. Yeah.
My name's Dale Dupree. My friends, they call me the copier warrior. Not everybody knows that. It's a little known fact about me, but I spent 13 years in the copier industry selling, you guessed it, copy machines. Are you guys bored yet? Should I keep going at this point?
So is this before or after Larry Levine? Because I know.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that Larry Levine's background as well?
Yeah.
Well, I think Larry, like people would refer to Larry, who was one of my mentors, as ancient, and I'm still young. So I know there's like some white in my beard, but
thank you for the delineation.
He definitely beat me to copier sales for sure. He got there first, without a doubt. So actually, you can find the copier warrior featured in Selling from the Heart as well too. Larry put it right up on me on there. God bless him. But my story really starts before the copier space gobbled me alive. It starts back in the early days of me being born into the copier industry, if you will, with toner running through my veins. Because in 1984, my father actually, who was a copier salesman, he decided to quit his corporate job, working for the man, the big box store, and set off on a journey, on a pilgrimage to change the freaking game inside of the copier space. And in doing so, like, there's lots of details to this. Some of my favorite are that my father was an incredible football player and had scholarships to some of the greatest universities you've ever heard of in your life. This is the part where I make a joke about like Valencia Community College, but that would be bad and a disservice to my father, because we're talking like LSU, Auburn, Florida State, Alabama. I mean, my dad was the GOAT to beat. Tom Brady got lucky, you know what I'm saying? So unfortunately, my father got hurt in the process of all this. He was injured. Like, he had a neck injury that to this day, like, you know, I still don't know how he lived with it, and most doctors don't. You know, like, I remember he got into a fender bender and went to a chiropractor, and they did a scan of his neck, and the guy came out like sweating and like shaking, like, you know, something happened to you. And my dad's like, yeah, it's a college football injury that I've had my whole life. You know, what a crazy thought, right? So my dad really has, like, he's been through the ringer. He was put through things ultimately that caused him pain his entire life, suffering his entire life. but he was always the most grateful person that you ever met. So here he is in this position where he can stay in school and kind of just like graduate and do his thing and kind of get through, with his sports, in the background of things, because he'd sit on the bench. Or he could grab one of his friends' convertibles from back in Orlando and drive down from East Tennessee and look for a job, which is exactly what he did. And he became a copier salesman who just started selling papers. So my dad is the original Dwight Schrute, for anybody that's wondering. And in the process of that, he graduated it to the bigger products, became absolutely incredible at what it was that he did, and just moved his way to the very top. And then in the process of that, he experienced everything that all of us experience: the heartache, the hardship. Sales isn't easy. No matter where you're doing it, it's not easy, kind of period. But when you're doing it inside of a culture where lying is acceptable, and not just like in business, but in like your personal life as well too. My dad had to do some things that he was never really proud of, or he said no to things that he didn't want to do in the first place. And so for him, it was, hey, look, either I go and start my own business, or I suffer through, being the top rep at an organization that I don't believe in at all. So he did what anybody would do, right? He started his own business. Now, what's cool about my father too is the integrity of this man was absolutely incredible. And not just because he's my dad, I'm saying these things. It's really because like he was who he said that he was. And I'll get to that as we go. But he went to pulled up the map and went to the area like right on the edge of his non-compete, which was a little county called Brevard. And he crossed over it a couple miles, and he opened a business. Now, he didn't have a lot of relationships in this area. He did live in Ormond Beach. If any of my fellow Floridians out there are listening, my dad had his office in Titusville, and he lived with my mom up in Ormond Beach, but eventually relocated back into Orlando, which is where his original territory was and where his job kept him. And Volusia County was also his territory, right? But he stayed out of it. Just went straight into Brevard, like this unknown area, and said, I'm going to sell coffee machines. And as you can imagine, everybody and their mom came after him, non-compete, cease and desist. And my dad's like, cool, like, I don't understand. I did everything I was supposed to do that you guys told me to do. I've acted with integrity, so I'm going to keep doing my thing. 29 years my dad ran that company. And in the early stages, because again, I was born into this. So in 1985, boom, I'm in the world. My dad brought us to work and treated work as if it was part of the progression of life. He looked at his employees as family. And I know a lot of people hate that because they say, yeah, well, my family fired me and left me up to dry. Like, my dad was the guy that you wanted to work for. He wasn't the person that was out slashing departments and telling people they had 2 weeks left at their job out of nowhere. He just did a fantastic job of being something much more appropriate. And when it comes to the way that he lived his business life and he lived his personal life, there was no skeletons and there was no differences. So I grew up wandering the halls of this company. I would sit with like the finance people, probably not the most like compliant or smartest thing to do, to have like your 6-year-old son like writing the checks, that are going out. But here, sign these for your dad. We'll just say it was your dad. It was good times. So I remember those memories specifically very vividly, because it felt as if I was being welcomed into something, and that I was never, being told that this is off limits, or maybe when you're older, whatever the case, right? So my dad really ran a family business because of that. But as the prodigal son, which is what I call myself sometimes, I turned the business down at 17 years old. I had my own sports scholarships. I turned those down too. And I came to my parents and said, hey, I'm going to start a band and tour the United States and get signed to a record label. And they said, we love you. Good luck, and we got your back, which most parents don't say, and this is why I point that out. Never got pushed back from them. I never got told, hey man, you got all these scholarships though, like what's the point doing that? So instead I was adamantly supported by my father and my mother. After 52 days on the road, I learned some of the greatest sales lessons of my career, and didn't really apply, the identity of what sales was at that point in time. But as I started to learn the B2B space, I realized, man, I've been in sales all my career, quite frankly, outside of sales even. And then like life is sales, which is part of the Rebellion's creed and ultimately our founding principles. So in this process of going and playing music, I actually end up getting signed to a record label. I've got albums all over the world. I'm living the literal dream that most people want to live, except for the fact that music is not what people tell you. And you can be on the Billboard 100 and be broke as a joke. It's kind of the bottom line, right? So even though I was saving money, we were making money, things seemed to be going in the right direction. I was also on the road a lot. There's a lot of promiscuity on the road, lots of issues around like drug and alcohol abuse. Most musicians will tell you these things. And ultimately it was the drug side of things and somebody in my band that really started to open my eyes to like, I don't want to live this kind of life. And the prodigal son returned. I came crawling back to my father and said, don't got a degree. I didn't go for any of my scholarships. And now here I am 5 years later going, what am I going to do with my life? And so I wrote my dad a 7-page like dissertation about why he should hire me. And he came back to me and said, yeah, you can work here, but you got to pick from 2 jobs. You can be the janitor or you can be in sales, but you have to start at the bottom. And that to him, was like the way to work yourself up inside of the organization. So, as fate would have it, I chose sales. The janitor thing sounded awesome. Quite frankly, I just wasn't that into it. So I chose sales instead. And the rest is history. I spent 13 years in the copier space, like I said earlier. By the time that 2019 had rolled around, I had earned every accolade in the book, had done more than I ever thought I would do. I had clients all over the world, international clients, local clients. I had kind of experienced business on another level that most people don't. And because of that, I started to get the vision of entrepreneurialism and, living out my father's footsteps. So I took the leap and I started a sales training company, but I had the vision ultimately of this idea of building a community and a movement. And what I mean by that is that when I founded the Sales Rebellion, it wasn't like, hey, we're going to coach and train people. I founded the Sales Rebellion and said, hey, we're going to go find the silent majority, the people that don't really have a home because of the principles and ultimately the ethics that we lead with, and that they're not very popular. What's popular is the Wolf of Wall Street, right? What's popular is this completely different identity of sales in most cases. That I wanted to bring something different to the world that I had experienced, not just through my father and the way that he sold and mentored me, but also the way that I had created my own success to build out my own legacy just the same. So I founded the Rebellion in 2019. It's been a wild ride. Our 5-year anniversary was this month on the 1st. So we're officially at the mark. I think 60% of businesses fail at this point. So I've at least made it this far, so maybe I've become a statistic a little bit later, but right now I'm doing good. Things are great. So,
Hey,
and really, please go ahead.
No, I just quick question going back to your music days. You had mentioned something about, being a great sales experience. What would you say is like the key sales takeaway you grabbed from your rock star days?
So if you can imagine that every night you're playing in a new place, especially when it's your like first couple times through these major cities or small cities, even at that, no matter what, like you're a stranger to these communities. And so every night, like you're literally cold calling, you show up to an event / venue and nobody knows who you are. Maybe they bought your CDs and they know who you are to some capacity, but they really don't know you. Right. And maybe they're there to be convinced of something, or let's go check these guys out and see if they're any good. But no matter how you look at it, you're kind of like in a room with a bunch of strangers. So in the early stages, when we were nobody at all, those first 52 days that I spent on the road, we actually we convinced, right, is probably the best word to use, which is a sales topic, right, to some capacity. These other 2 bands to go on tour with us, and even better than that, here's another just look into how good I am at sales without being too egotistical right now. We convinced these guys also when they got to the first show to let us ride in their tour vans because we didn't have one. We had a pickup truck. and so like the first night in Orlando after our show with like 500, 600 people, and these guys were on like cloud 9, like, oh, it's going to be a great tour. And we were like, hey, can we put 2 guys in your van and 2 guys? I mean, it was a moment, and we convinced them and they said yes. And then we hit the road. Right. But so there was ultimately a lot of lessons, but the thing that to me feels the most like familiar for people listening is that I'd walk into a room with a bunch of strange people that I had to engage. So I'd walk up to them with a backpack on, a bunch of burned CDs, for those of you that can remember those days, in my backpack, and these little like sleeves that were red and pink and blue and orange that we bought at Best Buy, right? And I would walk up to people with a literal Walkman and headphones and say, hey, we're playing tonight. My name's Dale. I would introduce myself. Where'd you guys come from? Do you live here? Try to get to know people. I'd ask them if they would listen to the music before we played. And if they liked it, I'd say, hey, I can sell you a CD right now for $5. And I got these stickers with them too. And, so I was literally engaging people, selling to them like complete strangers and hoping ultimately that they'd stick around and watch us play at the same time too. So there was a lot of strategy ultimately and like building community because of that, and not just being there like to push a product or to sell something, but ultimately to like pull at the heartstrings of people, connect with them emotionally, create impact, and ultimately give them an experience that they've never had before. Now, that was the key learning for me from a sales perspective.
Tom, the other big similarity between the music business and sales is that if you believe the Wolf of Wall Street, there's a lot of promiscuity and drugs and alcohol in sales too. I do want to jump in, Dale, on the sales rebellion and really get at the heart of what sets the sales rebellion apart. I love the web design, the website design, hashtag choose legendary. Like what's the approach and what have you learned over the last 5 years engaging with people and teams?
Great question. So it for me, it kind of started with this identity of, okay, cool. So as the copier warrior, where did my success really come from? Did it come from just like slamming the metrics, so making like thousands of calls every day, or did it come from the status quo style of selling, or where did it ultimately really come from? And as I started to build that out, even in my own mind, as I was just like like literally experimenting as a copier salesperson, I recognized some things. Like number one being that I created a personal brand. Like, so when I said that my friends call me the copier warrior, I mean it. That I literally had, and you can check it out, copierwarrior.com. I still have the old website up from so many years ago. I had my own personal brand. I had my own TV commercial. I had everything you could possibly imagine from a marketing and advertising and branding standpoint, and I was super creative. So nothing about what I did was mediocre, vanilla, or status quo at all. I wore my heart on my sleeve. The same Dale Dupree that was out on tour in his band was the same Dale Dupree that was, rocking the streets and, knocking doors down, as they like to say, and meeting people. But ultimately, my big goal, which is another piece of what sets the sales rebellion apart, was to build community. Like, I'm not in sales to be transactional. I'm in sales to leave a legacy. I'm in sales to build something that's worth more than money to myself. I'm in sales to allow other people to also ultimately prosper because I have something for them that they don't know about, because of my ingenuity, because of my tenacity, because of the way that I see the sale in the first place so differently than everybody else. That like if sales is linear, it's like follow these 5 steps. You could call me, you wouldn't even be able to say that I'm abstract. I'm probably beyond that. Whatever word describes something beyond that, because to me, it's meeting people where they are. To me, it's putting people over products. To me, it's putting community over commission checks. To me, it's why would I ever pitch somebody when I can give them an experience, something tangible, something they can hold on to, something they can believe in, something that disrupts what salespeople typically do to them. So they see the authenticity of Dale and they buy into that ultimately themselves. I'm not selling them anything when that happens. It's them doing the selling in those moments. So that'd be it in a nutshell, if I could say.
I think great sellers, it's like musicians. It is an art. And I love the way that you approach your craft. I got to ask, from a musician perspective, what instrument or instruments do you play, and what's your favorite song or style to play?
So the band was heavy metal. For anybody that is curious, you can just type in my name and Imperial, like Star Wars, and you'll find the music. We're still out there. Brothers owned us, so they have all my. Well, I have my publishing rights. If you're out there and you're a musician, own your publishing rights. When you own your publishing rights, everything changes. Everything is better. But I digress. The idea of metal kind of derives from this identity of emotion. So metal isn't like, people look at metal as this loud, crazy thing. Like metal is like its own rebellion against the traditions. It is a place that people go because they're tormented. It's a place that people go because they don't fit in. It's a place that people go because their mom told them that they had to stop smoking cigarettes, like whatever the case. But again, it's like a non-traditional place that people meet and find each other ultimately. And so, I was attracted to the community side of it. and some of the community side of it is that there's gangs and violence, and like it gets a little intense, right? But when I learned the derivative, when I learned like really where metal derives from, I should say, it comes from this even deeper place. Blues is really where like this whole idea of metal comes from, which starts as the blues, turns into shock rock. Maybe some of you have heard of Screamin' Jay Hawkins, or Alice Cooper is a good one as well too, that kind of took this traditional way of doing something like the blues or jazz even at that, and taking scales and notes and patterns and making them just like a little angrier as a thought process, and really going out and getting in people's face with what they're doing so that people will listen and that people would absorb and people would get involved with the message. So that's my like super philosophical outlook on music. I sang for the band. I would tell you that I play pretty much every instrument. Am I good at them? Like, nah, not like, I'm pretty good at the guitar. I was pretty good at drums at one point. It's pretty good at a couple things, but I've picked anything up and tried it at least, and occasionally when somebody was like too high or too drunk to record something, I would do it for them. Right. But for the most part, it was mostly just vocals on my end. And that's really where my passion is.
Cool.
I have a quick comment, and Brandon, I know you have a question I want to jump in with, but what I heard you say, Dale, going back to what you were talking about, sales rebellion and what you're doing is with sales is, and correct me if I'm hearing this wrong, is you're really trying to give purpose to sales. I think a lot of people look at sales as a job, right? Or something that I do. But what I really liked around, a way to make money. But what I heard you say is sales can be a real purpose, a real passion, not just because I'm trying to sell something and make money, but you're really improving somebody's life. You're improving, creating an experience. Obviously nothing starts until somebody buys something, right? So you're kind of creating that. Am I hearing you right? Is that really a kind of a key premise or framework behind the rebellion approach?
Yeah, without a doubt. So even when Carson was asking about like some of the language that we use, so I'd come up with the concept of like choosing legendary as the idea of allowing people to kind of lean into ultimately this concept of what is your legacy and that you're leaving on a daily basis. So if I'm to choose legendary, I'm choosing to impact people beyond just a transaction. And ultimately, I'm choosing to build a legacy for myself that other people don't just experience, like they are influenced by to an extent where they look at us. And this can tie back pretty easily to my father real quick, that I can just kind of like get back to the point that I was making earlier about who he was and his integrity and how he impacted people. But unfortunately, I lost my father in 2016 to cancer. And at his funeral, I was the person that gave the eulogy of the oldest son. So I was tagged to do that. It was pretty difficult. My dad was my best friend. He still is, in my heart. He's my best friend. He's the reason that I am everything that I am today. There's no other person that molded me like my father. And standing up on that stage was probably one of the most intimidating moments of my life, but I was like ready to do it. And prior to, I sit in the front of the crowd of the audience and just like dialed in for hours. Like I got there hours early and just like sat down and just chilled would be a good way to put it. And just thought, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? I wrote most of it down and just went through that process over and over in my head until the pastor said, Dale, come on stage. And I walked up on stage, and I'm telling you, I've never seen something so impactful in my life with my own two eyes. I looked out on what, I had heard the commotion, but I looked out on for the first time what was just like a literal sea of people. There was like thousands of people in this room just to pay respects and homage to a guy that sold copy machines, right? That was like what he was. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't, some big fancy name in the community, but like to those people, he absolutely was. And at first I even thought like we're having some kind of like wedding crashers thing happen here. Like these people are in the wrong place, or they're just here for the free food or something, right? Like, but people for hours, for like literally 7 hours straight after the funeral, we stuck around and listened to story after story of people saying things like that your father was an awesome person. He sold me my first copy machine. I met you when you were this young, that lots of great stories, but people then, followed that up with like, your dad changed my life. He made me think about things differently. His compassion, the way that he carried himself. He prayed for me one time because I was having a hard day. I got diagnosed with cancer and told your father, and his reaction was incredible. And he was so supportive of me. And, he brought us dinner one night. I mean, there was just all kinds of stories ultimately that came out of that. And I like to say it's my big fish moment. I know y'all mentioned movies earlier, so maybe you've seen that movie where I didn't have a disbelief in the idea that my dad had done these incredible things through his sales career. I never really witnessed or seen them because my father believed that, in his version of choosing legendary, that all things in life that he decided to do, whether personal, private, or public, that they would all kind of be in a way that reflected a servant leadership mindset where he didn't need any kind of, praise or his status to be changed because of his actions. He needed zero gratification through the process of people even saying thank you. Like my dad did so much for the community in a way that he never wanted to take a drop of the credit. To the extent that it just had literally changed people's lives. And again, like we never heard the stories because we didn't come home like, hey, check out what I just did for these people. So being in that room in that moment at his funeral, seeing the evidence of his life was powerful. And it changed the way that I thought about sales that day, that moment. I already thought sales was the greatest job in the world, but after that, I knew it was the greatest job in the world.
You know what I mean, first of all, Dale, thank you for sharing that personal story and your personal journey. And what I'm hearing you say, and for salespeople out there, is that you know yourself and you've led yourself. And I like that phrase, that you're selling the way you choose to show up as your human, and sales is your vocation, but you're showing up as Dale and then you're applying it into sales. And I think, as we're moving more and more into this chaos and change in the sales industry, we just came out of the predictive revenue model where everything was more Wolf of Wall Street, pound the phone and hit your numbers and all that. I think we're moving into this more relationship building, this building rapport, staying top of mind with people. As we talk about, how do we attract and retain attention and being in front of people and being genuine. I think what you're talking about is a great model for people to know yourself, so you know how to show up in sales. Because if you don't know yourself, you don't know how you want to show up in sales, you're just going to follow whatever the latest 5-step program is and go pound away at the phones. So I really appreciate that. Tell us a little bit, like, I think you laid a really strong foundation. You've got a strong why. You saw your father's legacy. How are you leading either sales professionals or sales teams to actually be able to do this in a world where there's so much pressure to hit your 30-day goals and hit your quota of outreach for the day and all those other things? And you're sitting there going, I created a personal brand and then I became, the copier warrior and all this stuff. How do you get people to be able to come to peace with this way of doing sales?
It's quite simple. We literally just teach them to rebel. We teach them to look at the way that the world is telling them to hold the sales standard flag and run with it, into traffic basically. And we say, drop it, like get rid of that. Stop running in that direction. Stop doing what other people tell you to do that they think is right for you, and start doing exactly what it is that you know in your heart that you're supposed to be doing in the first place. Sales leaders hate us. Like, if I can be candid about it, like because they love our message. Like, who doesn't love the message of ultimately being having purpose in your life and being something that rises above the fray? Like, I think that the rebellion speaks to a lot of people, but at the same time, those same people, they turn around and they go, yeah, but I could never let my people do this because I take too much time on LinkedIn writing content and whatever, like curmudgeon thing that might come out of their mouths. But I'll tell you right now that the ones that do commit to us, they commit to us because they care about their people, because they want their people to be better, because they ultimately understand that they're playing a short game, one that's ruled by the identity of the metric, right? Which is now this thing that, people are pretending like they have a grasp on, but they don't. And they haven't since 2020, to be quite frank. People have been going like, yeah, things are things got crazy and really good. And then all of a sudden 1 year later, and they're like, I don't know what's happening. We just fired 17% of our workforce. Like, it is a literal roller coaster right now based on this thing, like the metric inside of, again, the identity of the status quo of sales. And because of it, it's ruining everything. Like, you have more turnover with sales departments than you've ever seen before, just because of like, we don't have the money, or we're not getting the results, right? Like, and to me, like, that's a travesty and a shame ultimately. But for the reps, like, they don't have to live under that standard. There's plenty of leaders out there that think like this. And ultimately, if a rep takes control of their own life in the process, and they're over here like obeying the metric to some extent to make sure that the boss is satisfied and happy. What we do and what we teach them over here to be so different, to use creativity in their approach, to connect with people on a completely different level, to rebel, actually gets them results pretty quickly too. In most cases, we don't guarantee that. I hate saying it because we don't want people to think that it happens quick. Some it happens in 6 months, some it happens in 6 days. I mean, it's really different for everybody. Right. But what happens is their boss is like, yo, what are you doing? Great job. Keep pounding the phone. And then in the meantime, back with us and like our secret rebel hideaway, it's like the truth comes out and it's like, I didn't get jack from the phone. I didn't get jack from those emails. I got everything from sending a crumpled letter or a cutting board, with the person's, company, like etched into the whole thing with like a little note that says, hey, just wanted to see if we can carve out some time and build a relationship. And, these are the types of things that people ultimately connect with. And because of that, we're seeing things like, a rep all the way from like Betty Crocker or like the Flying J gas stations, right? Or, the big like Walmart brand, Tyson brand type organizations taking meetings with companies they never would have taken before ever, period, right? We're watching that kind of success happen for reps all over the place, all the way down to reps just winning like they should be, right? Like walking into a small family practice that's like a law firm or a doctor's office and meeting, in the midst of 12 people, meeting the decision maker more effectively, more efficiently, and in a prosperous way, instead of it being this game that we're all playing and fighting against each other in order to like keep our job as salespeople, right? So I know it's a little bit of a tirade there, but again, just going back to the identity ultimately of how we help people do it is that we say like, hey, everything you're doing now, it sucks. And we'll teach you how to do it different and rebel, but you have to be committed to that. You have to understand that you will most likely be told that what you're doing is dumb. Like I was. You will most likely be made fun of. You will be told by your peers, like, I would never try that. Like, and that's exactly why you should do it. Because without risk, there is no great reward. And ultimately, living in comfort gets you absolutely nowhere in life.
Man, I feel like I need to listen to this in the mornings to get myself pumped up. Dale, I feel like I've been a sales rebel for a long time too. I've always done things very differently than the norm and the fold. And I've always tried to take a step back and really prioritize people and process and resources and really understand like what's the total addressable market here and how can I like be bold and go out and get it, right? And go meet the right people, say the right things, but build relationships at the heart of it. What would you say, because you basically, everything that you just summed up, like I feel like every seller needs to hear, what are sellers today doing that we collectively need to get them to stop doing? Like people listening, watching right now, what do they need to stop doing and do instead?
So if I'm going to hone in and like really double down on something right now, which I do quite often, I would say the first thing is like the way that we prospect. It sucks. It's terrible. That this idea of like, let's go to this big data company and buy this list of saturated leads or people that like don't even exist at these companies anymore. And then like, and this is where we literally put people into positions to fail, right? This is where we really fail people as leaders in the first place. Like, oh no, here's your list. Call on these people. I swear the data's good. It's like, well, we haven't paid, we paid 15 grand for it 5 years ago. And everybody's going, we got to get our return off this thing. Like there's no a realistic perspective here, right? So if again, like there's a lot of components to why we do it wrong. But I think the biggest issue is that so many people are like, do 100 calls a day. Here's a great success story. I can't wait for this kid to have more success with this as well too, and come out and tell the world what he's done at his organization. He works at a startup. these guys basically when they brought him in, they said, okay, and he's never been in sales before, by the way. He's been in ministry, all these other things. It would be like the literal opposite of what you would think you would pull into a startup. So I applauded them for hiring him in the first place. That's a great way to take a risk on a person. But he comes through our system thinking like, oh, I'm going to like learn how to make my 100 calls a day better. And when he gets there day one, we're like, nah, dude, we don't even do 100 calls a day. Like, we're going to do a total of 100 people that you're going to get in front of. Like, that's how we look at it. And of course, like at first his bosses were like, it's a little crazy. That's not how we've always done it. So this is uncomfortable for us. Mm-hmm. But what he has proven in a very short amount of time, 6 weeks, I think, is that, so he started, we have as an example, we have a product called the Crumpled Letter. You can go to crumpledletter.com if you want to check it out. It's a very minimal investment for a rep to make to basically set themselves apart inside of the industry. And we do it on purpose, like we want to provide reps an opportunity to basically say like, what I'm doing sucks or it's not working the way I want it to for myself. Stop worrying about what your leader thinks in the first place. Like, start with you. Like, if you're not filling up your cup, then how can you be the best in the first place? So if you have somebody telling you like do 100 dials every day and you're just literally allowing that to saturate your passion, your outlook on life, your sales walk, that sucks. And you should get away from that. Right. But I digress. Coming back to the Crumpled Letter, we use these, we take 100 people as an example, and we have a whole sequence that we put them through. We have up to 7 total letters. The Crumpled Letter is just one of them. And essentially we put people through an experiential motion, right? And the questions that we get on this is like, how are you sending the Crumpled Letter to people? Well, we use their addresses. Well, what about people that work from home? Well, we send them to their houses or we send it to their office and it gets forwarded to their house. Like, there's there's digitizing mail. There's all these different rules that like people just don't know about, right, in the first place. So there's a big picture perspective here that a lot of people are missing because they're doing it the same way they've always done it. They're comfortable with that. They don't even know what's happening outside of their own little bubble in the first place, right? But again, like, I digress back to this story. This rep, he starts sending out these letters to, I think he started with 70 people to get going. He starts making his first round of calls, gets somebody on the phone, has a response unlike anything that the company has ever heard before, where basically, and this is the best part, the data that they had on the organization was wrong, completely wrong, right? It was completely unqualified, but this person had such a good experience through getting this letter in the mail, opening it and going through this little adventure that he created for them. But by the time he called, this guy was waiting for him and had ideas already of like, hey, in our network, here's some people I can hook you up with. Like, he was already ready for this. And imagine that you were to send it to somebody that was qualified. It's kind of the thought process in that as well too. And really, it is a complete disruption to the typical way that we do prospecting now. It hurts a lot of people's feelings when we say this kind of thing, especially all of our friends out there that do a lot of cold calling. We love you guys. We respect you guys. But ultimately, you got to start thinking bigger in the way that we approach life and the way that we approach business and how things are evolving in 2024. If we don't get back to this identity of building community, building networks, building sustainability, and we just keep burning through 10,000 people a month because that's what we've always done, we will burn our businesses down in the process.
Well, you're going to burn your people down in the process, right? Which is what's happening a lot, why burnout is so high and all that, man. And I love that, Dale. I'm sorry, Carson. I know you were going to ask something. I just couldn't help myself.
No, you're good. I was actually going to echo what Dale just said. I ran a call center years ago, and I had people that were patting themselves on the back for making 400 dials in a day. My best rep made 12, because she got everyone to answer. She closed multiple deals a day because she was having the best conversations. I couldn't care less about total number of dials. It's all about quality of relationship and quality of message. And, I think the other element is when I started doing social selling and leveraging it to create relationships with line of business leaders that nobody in my company was talking about, my manager was brand new and didn't get it. And actually went after me because I wasn't doing things like everybody else was doing. And then thankfully I got a better manager and won every award that was humanly possible in the company. So it just goes to show that you've got to buck the system sometimes while you're building that reputation. Now people will let me do whatever I want from a prospecting perspective, but I had to earn my way there to be a respected rebel.
But what I like about the rebel though we talk a lot about, right, the buyer is different, the buyer journey is different. What you're talking about, Dale, and certainly what we talk about being rebels is actually way better for the customer and the buyer too, right? It's not only better for the salesperson, but the fact is that's what the customer or the prospect or the buyer really wants. They don't want the cold calls. They don't want the emails. None of us want all that stuff is buyers. So we're actually doing a service not only to ourselves as salespeople, but we're doing a service to our customers and our prospects and our buyers. But
We
Dale,
have,
is there an end? Oh, go ahead, Brandon.
oh, I was going to say, we have the comment in LinkedIn before LinkedIn went down.
Yeah,
That
we
said
must
that,
have crashed their servers is the only thing I can think of.
that sense of community is something that people love. And that's what you're building. That's what you're promoting with sellers, is to think differently. You did it when you were the warrior, the copier warrior. Like you called it a personal brand, but really you built a community. You built a sense of belonging, and people wanted to be a part of that. I mean, you were selling a commodity. You were selling a printer and toner, but they wanted to be a part of this world, this experience that you were creating. And more so now than ever, the buyer experience from soup to nuts is what's important, because sales has become a commodity. There's so much competition out there. How do you give them an experience and help them feel like they want to be a part of something?
Yeah, when I think about the word experience, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that most people, they, in general, I should say, we hear words and we kind of put our own meaning to them. And like, so this is, I loved what Tom was saying, because the first thing that I sat down and thought about was, when I was selling copiers, was, not what's going to get me more appointments and make people buy. But the first thing I thought about was, what are the negative stereotypes of my industry? Like, when people hear the word copier company or salesman, what do they think? And in the negative sense, and then what do they think in the positive sense? These are some of the first places that I like to go from a foundational standpoint, because I personally believe that everybody hates sales, and I stand behind that. No matter what people say, like, I stand behind that statement, because I can, like, drill into it enough that you'll admit it too. Because listen, anybody that's watching right now that's like, I love sales. Okay, cool. So the next time you get a call at 6:25 p.m. In the evening, when you're sitting with your family having dinner, or by yourself watching Netflix or whatever the case, and on the other line is a young, bright, strapping gentleman or lady that says, hey, have this great opportunity for you to buy a timeshare or go on a cruise, or, hey, the car dealership down the street's having a great sale this weekend. Entertain that call, right? Because who does? Like, how many people get a call from a cruise line? They're like, oh, like, in middle of biting a sandwich, like, hold on one second. Everybody leave the room. I need to take this sales call. Kids, be quiet for 20 minutes. And they're like, nobody does that. So inherently, we all hate sales, because ultimately how we look at sales and perceive sales is negative. We see it as a place where people come to interrupt us. We see it as something that's very self-serving for the individual on the other side. I know that there's a difference between, like, selling an HR SaaS product and selling a cruise down in Miami, right? I know there's a difference between that, but ultimately, again, these things all, they crash together. So even if I'm selling something different than the cruise, because of this inherent nature of people not liking sales and the experience that they've had at some point in their life with a salesperson, they will project it on you when you tell them what you do, period. Right? So if we can start in those places, then it's easier to overcome them. So I said, okay, a salesperson walks in this front door, and the experience they give is, hi, I'm with this company. Take me to your leader. I'd like to set 15 minutes and discuss your leases. This is like a literal way that every single sale, and they got the site seller in hand. They open it up and pull some stuff out, and they grab a card, and like, this was, and sure, people are listening to this like, wow, you're old. Like, yeah, this was like literally like 5 years ago people did this, like, it's been around for a hot minute, right? But again, like, in my industry, I found the stereotypes back in 2009, 2010, when I was, like, in my prime and had been in the industry for a couple of years, and said, cool, so what if I walked in with a crumpled up piece of paper that looked like trash, and I handed it to somebody, and I said, hey, I know you throw sales marketing stuff away, when you get handed it, so I pre-crumpled this one to make it easier for you. and people loved it, and they said, that speaks to me. That hits a literal nerve, and it helps me to feel a familiarity, and that you get it, and that your proactive approach around understanding how I feel makes me think that I'm important to you. Now you got to prove that, right? You got to prove and earn that trust and credibility, but this is a great starting point. And so when I say the word experience, a lot of people think like Disney, or they think, on the opposite spectrum of that, they think calling the 1-800 number and like having to sit through hours of hold just to talk to 17 people to finally get what you want, right? There's a lot of people hear that word a lot of different ways, but ultimately a good experience puts the receiver at the forefront of what's happening. So whoever is experiencing what's happening is the most important part. So like when we design experiences in the Rebellion, that's how we do it. We sit back and say, cool. So if I was getting a wallet in the mail, I was like, what is this? What's going to make me curious? What's going to make it feel familiar? What's going to cause me to be done with this wallet and go, this is the most clever, authentic thing that I've ever seen in my life. And I need to call this person. Like what is that formula? And that formula, again, like from an experiential standpoint, it puts the other person first, which is what we try to do in the Rebellion. It's what we try to teach rebels in the first place. But ultimately, it's going back to what Tom was saying, that like we're here to serve people the way we would want to be served. Like if I read an email before I send it and ask myself, would I reply to this? It's a great lesson, right? Because if I make a cold call and I go, how would I respond to this? I can put myself in that person's, just to some extent, I can put myself in that person's shoes, right? But then when I think like, well, what if my mom is on the other side? What if my best friend is on the other side? What if this person that's my neighbor who like hates people is on the other side? What would they say to those moments too? And the more that we can be aware, the better our experiences become.
That makes me think of one of the questions that we've stumbled upon and we like to ask, especially when we're talking to C-suite, is based on your behavior as a buyer and your team's behavior as sellers, would you ever talk to one of your own salespeople? Basically, would you buy from your own company? And I did it today with somebody in a C-suite, and he goes, "That's really interesting. I could honestly say, no, I would not." Why are you doing it? Why does your sales team sell that way?
Yeah, and it's just because the status quo, right? It's what we've been taught to do. So we assume that is the status quo of what is we're supposed to do, even though we know very well it's not going to work, or the chances of it working are very low.
Hey, Carson, I'm curious, how would Dale's approach and model work inside of Microsoft? And I know you're unique within Microsoft, but what Dale's talking about is pretty rebellious. It's pretty extreme. Would that work? Would that play? Would it even, or would you get fired?
It would totally depend. And I'm going to say a broad statement about just large companies or cloud companies,
Sure,
or however you want to say it. But it does work because I've leveraged some of the things that I know Dale does and talks about. And I know that doing things that are radically different can absolutely work. But to kind of the earlier talk track, I also know what it has taken to develop a reputation and a platform that I now have within tech and cloud that has that level of credibility. Like it's kind of one of those things that people probably would say like, yeah, I mean, if Carson says it works in this space, it works. But there's a lot of times where I will train and coach and show some of these unorthodox ways to go out and create net new relationships, to do exactly what Dale said earlier. And this is something that really resonated. Look at the reasons why a customer or a prospect won't take the meeting, or don't want to meet with you, or dislike salespeople, and take a counterintuitive approach to that. That is exactly what I tried to construct 10 years ago when I started working here. Was I listened to the reasons that people didn't want to meet with me, and I infused that into the ways and the reason and the value and the resources that I showed up with. And that is how I started being able to get the meetings that I wanted and needed. So in pockets, yes, it absolutely will work, but it requires people to actually have an open mind. It requires people to be sick of the status quo or the bad results that they're not satisfied with in order to make a radical change and to bet on a process that could make their results better. A lot of decisions are very metric driven. You know, Dale touched on this too. There's a lot of very metric driven decisions, but you've got to jettison these old ways of going after the metric and buy into a new way of doing it.
As we kind of wrap up here, Dale, a kind of a final question for you. Are there any industries in particular, and maybe this kind of ties into what you were asking, Brandon, are there any industries that you're seeing that are becoming a bit more rebellious faster, and some that are kind of really pushing hard and pushing back against some of the rebellious sort of approaches that you bring to the table?
I thought at first you were asking Carson again. I was like, I'm really interested to hear his answer.
Whoever wants to answer, it's totally fine.
If I can start though with this, that just based on like what I was hearing Carson saying too, I latched to it pretty heavily and have been like cycling it through my head. We have a rep that came through our program. We allow individual contributors to come to our program. It's one thing we do a little bit different than most of the other groups out there too, that, you know, a lot of folks don't want to take on individual contributors because it can be very time consuming. It's not very profitable. It's kind of the ultimate thought, but like we put people over product and profit, right? So for us, it's a mission. And so we had an individual contributor come through and he represented Google. Everybody's heard of Google, right? That's a big company. And like what he did was so ingenious that, you know, his team of 10 plus people on the enterprise side, his boss's boss, you know, everybody stepped back and was like, wow, this is really great. You know, this is really cool. You're getting responses from people that, you know, we've never gotten. And these are people that like for anybody listening that doesn't understand how enterprise works inside of something like Google, these are people that every 8 to 12 months, their literal account list gets like taken from them and they get a new one, you know, like, hey, well, it's been a year. Here's your new assignments of accounts. So it's hard to do what we're talking about even. And this would be like, where are the experiences that we design differentiate in a way that even like if you're in that kind of position, it's valuable for you, especially if ultimately your goal is to impact people and to build a legacy for yourself. Because like imagine priming somebody up so well through the nurturing experiences, through the sequencing, through the way that you make somebody the center of attention, as we like to say, that when the next rep comes along, that they're actually kind of excited to hear from somebody at the like, oh, what's up? You know, unfortunately, like it might be a little bit of a letdown over time when they realize you're not sending them really cool stuff like this last person did, or being more of a rebellious spirit inside of the relationship that you're creating with them. But you know, what's interesting about that statement though too is that we've also seen at big companies like Amazon and Google, where we've trained reps, we've seen those new reps come to the last rep and go, what did you do here? These people are like way different than anybody else on the list and that I've ever inherited. Like, this is awesome. Can you teach me? And really, like, that's, to me, that's how we create better outcomes for everybody. Because whether or not like the boss is buying in, whether or not the company is all about it, right? Whether or not there is a what's the word, permission, like to do these things, right? No matter what, it's what's right. It's really the kind of the bottom line. And like what's right is what's hard. What's hard is typically, you know, the thing that we want to try and we want to do, but you know, we tend to, even when we try it once, we tend to kind of walk away from it. So it's commitment, you know, like, so I would say, you know, from the perspective again of even like what I've so latched to what Carson was saying, because it was just poignant and perfect, right? Like it's exactly what we deal with on a daily basis from the perspective of, again, like, why should people do this? And will it work with their organization? Like it comes down to nobody cares as much as you, like, period. Nobody cares as much as you. So being caught up in this idea of like, what kind of experience should I give? And should I tell my boss about the experience I'm giving? And do I need permission in the first place? Like, I would just simply tell people to rebel. I would simply tell people that, yes, you need accountability in this process. And I'm not telling you that, like, you should get fired from your job because you did something they told you not to do. What I'm telling you is that no one has ever come to you and said, no, you can't send a crumpled letter. They'll come to you later when they find out you're sending them and be like, what are you doing? But nobody comes to you preemptively and says that. So like, take the risk, watch the fruit of that risk as well too. Enjoy it, bask and bathe in it, and remind yourself why you're in sales through that process. Because what this does is it opens a door to what sales ultimately and truly is. It is the greatest job in the freaking world, hands down. And if you already feel that way about it in the first place, imagine what happens when you let this into your life to begin with. And so, if you're out there and you're thinking about what Tom is asking, about what Brandon and Carson are saying about this whole dialogue, like, take the risk, Rebel, choose legendary, create a sense of wonder for those you seek to serve, and stop being a monotonous robotic sales rep. That's all there is to it.
Damn. I feel like we need the mic. Good Nelson Breakfast Club moment, walking on. That's it right there. Pow.
No, I mean, this has been, Dale, to me, very inspiring. If I look back, Carson and Brandon, to what, we're 76 episodes in, when we started with social selling, and I don't know how many different, changes we've had in social selling for all of that from the beginning has been doing stuff different, right? It's been rebelling against the process. We've certainly had a lot of comments, pro and con, over the months on this, but it's been really inspiring, Dale, to listen to your passion of this and how you're bringing it to the people, right? And you're really like slapping them upside the head a few times and going, all right, look at the world different. Yeah. And it's, again, thank you. It's been very inspiring and very, very insightful.
Yeah. You know what it's made me think of, and I know we're going over, but in 2016, I spoke at Sales 2.0 conference, I think it was, and I got laughed at on stage because of what I was talking about. And I backed down. I had one person that tweeted, Brandon, something like, Brandon pissing off the audience, he's speaking truth because the audience is rebelling. But I let it back me down. I thought, oh my gosh, I must be wrong. I'm not fitting in or whatever. And I backed down. And it took me years to get back on that horse. It was in, end of 2020 where I went, I know this works because there's real human beings on the other end, and we stopped treating people on the other side like they were real human beings. And so kudos to you for, first of all, what a blessing to have the family you had to give you that foundation. What I hear is a man who knows himself and is comfortable with living within it. And now you're going in and you're influencing salespeople. It's their vocation, but really what you're doing is teaching them how to embrace who they are and leave a legacy because they're embracing it better. And that, my friend, was worth everything having you on the show.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Somewhere some bad manager is watching this and saying, you rebel scum.
Right. Yeah.
No, he stopped watching us about 30 minutes ago.
Maybe that's how LinkedIn crashed. We had too many people protesting.
Had to slide in the Star Wars reference. It was low-hanging fruit.
It was, and it also is literally how I came up with the name for the company. So I love Star Wars.
So what's your favorite Star Wars film, Dale?
That's a loaded question because I grew up on the Ewok movies that I used to go down to College Park Video right around the corner from Blockbuster and check out and rent, like, myself with my allowance money. And I'd watch them for 5 days straight, the Caravan of Courage and the Battle for Endor, and then I would take them back and I'd save my money up and I'd do it again and again. But I found the Ewok movies because of the first three films. And Return of the Jedi, I loved Return of the Jedi so much. Like I definitely think that Empire Strikes Back, look at us. I definitely think that Empire Strikes Back is a really beautiful film and like definitely one of the best cinematic stories ever told. But Return of the Jedi is like it's all the right stuff. It's the right amount of sci-fi. It's the right amount of battling. It's space battles, like the whole 9 yards. Lightsaber fight between Luke and Darth Vader that's way better than the Empire fight. I mean, it's got a lot of great elements. But Rogue One came out. And when Rogue One came out, I I'm in the theater with like all my family and all my friends because it like Star Wars is like my mom showed me Star Wars. She loves Star Wars. And so like to go to the movie, like I watched episode 1, 2, and 3 in the theaters with her. You know, they're all right movies. I was a teenager when they came out, so it was like these are cool, but like this is kind of strange, right? But when Rogue One came out, after we had just got done watching like this brand new story of Rey and all these, you know, people that made it feel like the original film, but like with much better quality, right? When I watched Rogue One, dude, I sat in the theater crying at the end of this movie, just like it was everything I dreamed a Star Wars movie could potentially become. So that long answer.
No,
I thought it was.
I love it.
Love it. Tom, you better, or Carson, you better check us out. This is our longest episode.
Yeah. Well, before we go, Dale, if someone wants to learn more about what you do and the Rebellion, where should they go? Where should they find more about you?
Yeah, they can head over to salesrebellion.com if you want to see a bunch of like my almost 500 guest podcasts at this point. You just Google my name and the Sales Rebellion as well too. And if you want to see my content feeds, go to any social platform. On LinkedIn, it's linkedin.com/in/copier warrior. On the other platforms, it's at Dale Rebel Leader. Twitter, I guess it's called X now. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I'm out here, ladies and gentlemen. Come find us. Also, we have a secret Rebel hangout that we do once a month called the Rebel Hideaway. It's free for all salespeople that identify as rebels. You don't even have to identify as a rebel, though, guys. You just come. And then we have a free Slack channel as well, too. So come find the Slack channel. Come join up. Come get some creative, fun, purposeful ideas for your sales walk. And I appreciate you guys having me on, letting me promote myself.
No problem. Thank you. All right. Good stuff. Carson, any final thoughts? You want to take us home?
I'm just ready to join the rebellion. Dale, Thank you. Audience, thank you. And until next time, happy modern selling.